Hello, this is Tim Unruh. I hope everyone can hear me now. We had some audio issues to start off with, but we're welcoming you here to the NAESCO update where we tell you what's happening on Capitol Hill, as well as some of the happenings in the federal congressional area. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of update of what I'm hearing from some members. So as we look at what's happening, I think about our webinar. We had 160 people sign up, and we have right now about 120 people online. So that's actually a great number of people to be able to get together and talk about what's happening in our market and to understand a little bit about what each other's experiencing. It seems like not so long ago we had our federal workshop on March 12th, and I've been working at my home here in Fairfax, Virginia, sitting at my dining room table since about that date. But on March 12th, we had the federal workshop, and we had 120 members and guests in a conference room in downtown DC. And we had no reports of coronavirus from our event. Now that we're 7.5 weeks out, we think we're pretty clear that we didn't infect anybody at the event. But it feels like that was kind of the last hurrah before we all kind of went into our closed off state. And, some of the things that have been interesting to consider is at our last board meeting in November, one of the things that we had talked about was the challenge of getting contractors and the challenge of finding people to work in our industry. And I think here we are less than 6 months later, and how much has changed in our lives and how many things are different as far as how we go about our business. Today, we'll talk about a few of the issues I've heard from members as they relate to ESCOs. And I'll talk about the congressional relief packages that have passed, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. And then finally, we'll also talk about the NAESCO advocacy efforts of what we want to see happen. And then I'll introduce our special guest speaker, Jeff Genzer. So one of the things I've been hearing in the news and heard from members is some concern about baseline development. As we see energy consumption changing in the buildings, one of the concerns we have is as we're developing projects and we're trying to develop a savings pattern, we initially have to have some sort of a baseline adjustment to recognize that there's going to be a good number of weeks, potentially months in 2020 that our buildings were not occupied. And how do we handle that is important for us to make sure to consider as we look at the project consumption and the savings predictions. But also for the projects that we have in M&V, we need to understand how the empty buildings have affected energy use, but more so how the reoccupied buildings might affect energy use. As we look at the buildings going forward, we may see a change in the way outside air is brought into the buildings or the way that sanitizing practices have been required. For example, when I've talked to my former FEMP folks back in DC, they've told me that the building that they occupy near the Forstall building is operating off of 100% outside air. So we can imagine that they're just bringing outside air in and exhausting the rest of the air. The energy impact of that would be quite significant. Obviously, in the shoulder months, not so bad, but as we get to summer and winter, that'll have a significant impact on energy use. I've heard people talk about having to increase filtration and the resistance that filtration might add. And also, there might be some sanitizing requirements. For example, there may be some UV requirement or something to sanitize the air. And then also the occupancy changes that we expect. We might have a significant change in the way building occupancy exists, because I know our office, we've talked about having 2 teams come in so that we don't have the same people in the office at the same time. And if somebody gets infected, we don't lose everyone, but we can still operate. So we may have those considerations as well. Other building things that will impact ESCOs, we talked about indoor air quality and airflows, but we may have to have more directed airflows, more personalized airflows. We just don't know yet what that's going to be or what the sanitizing requirements are. But also the density of contractors working on site. I saw a news story just this week where construction workers working in the Cannon House office building came back in and 7 of them were infected with the coronavirus while the Congress was voting on the $484 billion package. And so effectively, we brought all of our congressional representatives into a building with contractors who had 7 infections that now is reported to be 17. Security system updates. I would imagine we might see some opportunities where security systems have to be updated. I know not all of our members do security systems, but quite a few have those as part of their packages, as far as tracking people in the building, who comes in, who goes out, as well as infrared scanning to understand who might have fevers and who might not. And then lastly, I think we have to all be concerned of our own employees, the safety of employees, material delays because of border closings. A lot of our materials are shipped internationally. And then contractor availability, where some contractors may have comfort coming in and working at a site, and some may be resistant to it. In general, what I've heard from our members is that a lot of the projects we have continued to have action, and construction continues. Some sporadic shutdowns, more heavily impacting the Northeast than it is the rest of the country. But it's been varied, and there has been some reports that it's loosening up a little bit and contracts are beginning to happen. The biggest challenge that I hear from our members is that business development has become very challenging, with state and local employees concerned over whether they'll have budgets or jobs or if they're furloughed, but also just uncertainty about where they may want to go. The message that I want to make sure that everyone understands is as we talk to hear what Jeff has to say and we see the packages that have been passed, is we think that there's some stimulus that's coming. We think it's coming. And so the message we want to get to those people we're talking to is we've got to develop those projects, because those that are further along in the development cycle have a greater chance of getting funding when the stimulus does arrive. So what has been passed so far? We had a first package, COVID-1, with an $8.3 billion passed on March 6th, which was some basic pieces for vaccines and testing. COVID-2, the Families First Act, passed $150 billion on March 18th. And that had some sick leave, expanded medical leave, tax day was delayed. COVID-3, the CARES Act, this was the big one that passed at the very end of March for $2.2 trillion, included the Paycheck Protection Program, disaster relief loans, some specific industry bailouts, as well as a lot of other things. And then finally, in the interim, COVID 3.5, because the Paycheck Protection Program so quickly ran out of money, a $484 billion package was passed, of which I believe 382 of that was additional dollars for the Paycheck Protection Program. What's interesting is if you add it all up, we've passed $2.842 trillion of COVID funding, and those are all called relief packages, not stimulus packages. The total economy in the U.S. in 2019 was $21.4 trillion. So the relief packages so far are about 13.3% of the total economy. Plus, there's other things that have happened as well. We know that the Fed has injected about $2 trillion, so they say, into the economy for a stimulus plan. We know that the Army Corps of Engineers has done a significant amount of work with hospitals and hiring contractors to do work. I know some of my members have indicated that they've been bidding for some of this work from the Army Corps of Engineers. So overall, we've had a significant amount of stimulus come in, from relief packages to stimulus, from banking help and so forth. And the question is, when or will there be a COVID-4, which includes what we call stimulus? Even as late as just news this week, we hear of waffling of whether that's going to happen or not. And Jeff will be able to give us more information on that. But from NAESCO's standpoint, we believe we're going to act like stimulus is coming, and that we have some energy efficiency allies that we work with, and we've all been putting forth a message of what we think is important. One of our strongest partners has been NASEO, and NASEO's message and our message are very much intertwined, in that we believe that buildings are infrastructure and they must be included. And we believe that there's a whole mission critical facility focus that should be looked at in this. We also believe that performance contracting will leverage taxpayer funds by 400 to 500%. So the amount we're asking for, we believe, is 20% down payment on projects. So if we're asking for $22 billion, we expect that would result in $110 billion worth of work. And we've asked our members to communicate to their members of Congress to tell them that this is a priority for them. So now it's time for our guest speaker, Jeff Genzer. Jeff is the president of the DWGP law firm. And the G in the DWGP does stand for Genzer. And Jeff is also our landlord for NAESCO. NAESCO co-offices with his law firm. His practice has focused on energy and environmental counseling. and project development, legislative advocacy, and litigation. Uh, Jeff is a great partner for us, and I'm not going to read his whole bio. I'll have this up here so you can look at it. But in general, Jeff is a great partner for NAESCO and is our legal counsel and somebody I go to often for advice. I consider him not just a coworker, not just a landlord, but also a friend. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and let Jeff tell us what he sees happening in the marketplace in the federal space.
Thank you, Tim. And first of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Tim? Great. Okay, I hope everybody else can hear me as well. And I want to join Tim and the whole NAESCO team and basically hoping everyone is staying well and avoiding COVID-19. This is a very strange time. I've been out of the office now since early March, and if you could see my inappropriately attired T-shirt, you would see that it says, I had my patient's test and I'm negative. And my wife definitely thinks that it's time for me to go back to the office. But let me talk about amplifying some of the points that Tim made for you about where we see things going on Capitol Hill. And again, if there's any trouble hearing me, I'm sure Tim will interject. And I think we're leaving time for questions at the end. So we'll just proceed. So as Tim mentioned, we've gone through 4 of these COVID-19 or coronavirus stimulus packages. He refers to 3 and 3.5. The closest parallel that we've had in terms of stimulus in the energy sector was the early days of the Obama administration with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in early 2009. I've been doing energy now for 42 years, and in the 1980s to the early 90s, there was a large infusion of cash to energy programs through oil overcharge refunds. I'm not sure if anybody on the phone remembers any of that, but that was about $6-7 billion. In the clean energy space under ARA, between the tax and non-tax benefits, it was really over about $90 billion. In the energy efficiency space, beyond the 25C residential efficiency, 179D commercial buildings deduction, and the Section 45L tax credits and tax deductions, there certainly is some type of potential appetite for doing something with respect to tax extenders and modifying those. But the primary hallmark of what people are talking about on Capitol Hill and in the administration is any further stimulus would have to show you can keep people employed or get people employed. A report was issued through the U.S. Energy and Employment Report that showed the clean energy job space is well over 2 million people across the United States. The U.S. Energy and Employment Report, U.S. year, it was a joint project between the state energy officials, NASEO, and the Energy Future Initiative, led by former Energy Secretary Moniz. I would certainly advise you to take a look at that report, because a lot of the issues related to whether another stimulus will happen is specifically tied to whether we can get jobs going quickly. So as Tim mentioned, we have certainly talked with a number of allies all over Capitol Hill, Senate and House, Democrats and Republicans, and with the administration on some of these ideas. We actually don't know, if you think about it, throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks, we don't know what's going to stick at this point. I will tell you that we have had a lot of very interesting conversations with folks on Capitol Hill, both sides of the aisle. There does seem to be an appetite for infrastructure, and in the context of infrastructure and jobs, people are thinking that in the energy world and in the clean energy space, energy efficiency, renewable energy, smart grid, things like that, that there is a potential appetite. So one of the areas that Tim mentioned and discussed was this proposal to target mission-critical facilities. As Tim mentioned, the idea is the MUSH market, as well as federal facilities. If you have private funds through energy service performance contracts and other vehicles that can do the efficiency upgrades, the maybe the renewable upgrades, whether it pencils out in terms of your engineering audits in your business, that could be covered by the private financing, by the energy service performance contracts. And the concept underlying the overarching proposal is that any funds related to resiliency, helping mission critical facilities, first responders, hospitals, schools, community shelters, police, fire, other first responder facilities, and especially obviously hospitals now in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, those type of resiliency upgrades that wouldn't necessarily pencil out could be supplemented with federal funds. So that's the concept: a addition of federal funds to assist these efforts on mission critical facilities. And I would say there's been great interest on Capitol Hill in that area. And as I'll state in a few minutes, it's very important that the NAESCO membership and the people participating on this call advocate and continue to advocate on both sides of the aisle, both the House and the Senate, on this, as well as the administration. So that's the mission critical facilities piece. Another piece that, again, just want to make sure you have the full panoply of proposals out there that I think have some legs. We talked about this mission critical facilities. The question is, how will the money get out to the businesses, the schools, the hospitals, et cetera, to get the job done? The most flexible vehicle that people seem to be glomming onto is a program called the State Energy Program, which has been around for 40 years. It is from a federal perspective, it is probably the most flexible state federal program that exists. The rules are written, and it specifically includes language from an amendment in 1990 that authorizes the use of energy service performance contracts and other financing mechanisms. So under the statute, and one of the things the folks on Capitol Hill are very concerned about is we don't want to write anything in terms of a stimulus bill that would then require the Department of Energy or other agencies to have to issue new rules, new guidance that would take at least several months to get out the door. So the State Energy Program seems to be a vehicle that people are talking about if this mission critical facilities proposal moves forward, because the rules are known. For your interest, if anybody wants to Google the relevant statute, please turn to 42 U.S. Code 6321 through 6325, with a special emphasis on 42 U.S. Code 6322, D as in David, 5. Again, I apologize for not having that on the slide, and Tim can certainly get this information out to you, but I think it would be relevant for you to have that close by. So that's the mission critical facilities. Another program, in addition to the state energy program, another program that's being discussed is the low-income weatherization assistance program. That received $5 billion under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Not a lot of the ESCOs work on that, but the weatherization program obviously provides weatherization services for low-income Americans. With the $5 billion that was provided under ARA, 1 million homes, additional homes, were weatherized. The state energy program received $3.1 billion. $5 billion went to the weatherization program. Another program that is being discussed on Capitol Hill, especially on the House side, is the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. That was created in the 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act and funded once in ARA, in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, to the tune of $3.2 billion. It provided 68% of the funds to the largest cities, and then another 28% of the funds went through the states to smaller cities. Problem with that program was, since the Bush administration, between 2007, when the underlying statute was passed, and 2009, when the Obama administration came in with ARA, no rules had been written for that statute. So as a result, DOE had to write rules on the fly. Again, the concern expressed on Capitol Hill is if we passed a stimulus in the context of infrastructure that includes some of these energy pieces, how quickly would the money get out the door? How quickly would it get to your industry, people on the phone? How quickly would the jobs be created? I would also point out that the division within the Department of Energy that has authority over these programs is the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Division, and they're at least about 100 employees short of what they're authorized to have at this time. So there's grave concern that if it's not just getting the money out the door and they actually have to draft rules or guidance, they would have a hard time doing it. And I think people like Daniel Simmons and Alex Fitzsimmons, who run the program, are actually dedicated public servants and would try to do the best they can. But it is an enormous task. That's why a focus on programs that are already authorized. And the mission critical facilities, as we've discussed, would not require a new significant authorization or DOE guidance. That could be handled at the state level. So we've discussed the state energy program, the mission critical facilities, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. Another program that's getting a lot of attention potentially is a program targeted to EV infrastructure, both the purchase of vehicles and incorporating those vehicles into infrastructure improvements, level 2 and fast charging. And I would say there's great interest on Capitol Hill on that one as well. Again, another program that is not of significant interest to most of you, that received $900 million under the COVID-3 legislation that Tim referred to, is the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. That pays the utility bills for poor people, not only electric, gas, but propane and oil heat, etc. So $900 million was proposed there and included in that final legislation. There are proposals out there to dramatically expand that to $4.3 billion for LIHEAP, and it's unclear whether that proposal has legs. Certainly the electric and gas industry, some of the parent companies of people on the phone, are very interested in moving that legislation. A proposal to create a new water program water and wastewater program as a complement to the LIHEAP program has been advanced by the water utilities, especially in light of the fact that with COVID-19, people need to wash their hands constantly. Water shutoffs is a real concern. Some of the folks on the progressive side of the political spectrum have advocated for language to be included in any supplemental COVID legislation that would prevent utility shutoffs. Again, I don't know how far that will advance, but that is certainly out there on the progressive side of the political spectrum. So we've talked about SEP, State Energy Program. We've talked about weatherization. We talked about the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, the EV infrastructure. We've talked about the mission critical facilities. Another proposal, I think two other proposals, three others that are could be of interest to your industry that are being discussed is a program that was funded under ARA, was called the State Energy Efficiency Appliance Rebate Program, that provided $300 million for the purchase of Energy Star appliances, not only traditional appliances and white goods, but also energy efficient air conditioning. That was a quick jump start to the retailers. It's been proposed that if you added insulation to the $300 million for that program, it could be dramatically expanded and would help get people working and get the retailers moving in the appliance industry. So that's another one that is being discussed. Again, that operated already under ARA, so no new rules would need to be written at the federal level. Another bill introduced by Congresswoman Kelly of Illinois is a reauthorization of Section 125 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, essentially providing for public building energy efficiency improvements. Again, that would run through the states. The program was authorized. This would expand it. And again, I would expect if that did pass, and it could actually be included in an appropriations bill rather than an authorizing bill, that could provide a tremendous opportunity for the NAESCO members to participate in that industry as well. Another area that we've seen a dramatic, a big problem is in the issue of building permitting. With a lot of the local governments, a lot of them shut down and doing remote work, like a lot of your businesses, we're seeing a real diminution in the ability to issue even building permits. So one of the proposals that has been advanced would be to get funds out to the local code officials and the building departments so that they could process permits both remotely and in an accelerated manner. So that's another proposal out there. As I mentioned, on the tax side, the 179D commercial building deduction is another program, another tax vehicle. If they do a tax vehicle, that could be advanced. Again, there are some modifications that a number of folks have proposed in that, but the real answer is, would any tax program be advanced at this point? So I think those are the major energy areas for which there is potential discussion on Capitol Hill, and whether it's in an infrastructure package or something narrower is not clear. Certainly on the Senate side, they're pushing for infrastructure. Senator Barrasso, who chairs the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, who's responsible for passage of the multi-year highway bill, has put forth their bill. They had one this summer, but no one has really, especially in an election year, no one has really suggested increasing gasoline taxes, though oil prices are obviously very low at this point. But that the traditional infrastructure that they're talking about, roads and bridges, could be a vehicle for expanding it in this area. Senate Majority Leader McConnell has tried to pour cold water on any infrastructure package or any state and local financing, frankly. There's a proposal from the National Governors Association for $500 billion in state and local funding to help support state budget shortfalls. And that would appear to be the state and local folks' primary interest. Senator McConnell has tried to, again, suggest this is not the time for infrastructure. He had suggested a pause in funding. The president has supported infrastructure, supported state and local funding, and has suggested that some infrastructure could be done. Senator Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, has indicated a strong interest in moving an infrastructure package, a state and local funding package, and what he has characterized as clean energy initiatives. Some of the things that we've talked about today could fit in that category. Over on the House side, Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Hoyer, the House Energy and Commerce Committee, especially on the Democratic side, the House Energy and Water Development Appropriations Subcommittee have all expressed an interest in clean energy stimulus. The House Transportation Infrastructure Committee has talked about infrastructure in the context of a transportation bill. House Ways and Means Committee handles the tax bills. So on the Senate side, we've talked to the Senate Energy and Water Development Appropriations Subcommittee, as well as the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and those are the primary committees with jurisdiction. I apologize for all of the inside baseball about the relevant committees, but to the extent you as NAESCO members are interested in pushing these programs, I would highly recommend that you communicate with those offices. Certainly Senator McConnell, the Majority Leader, Senator Schumer, the Minority Leader, Senate Energy Committee, Senator Murkowski of Alaska, a Republican, chairs that committee. Senator Manchin, a Democrat of West Virginia, is the ranking member. Over on the Energy and Water Development Appropriations Subcommittee, Senator Alexander of Tennessee, a Republican, chairs that subcommittee. Senator Feinstein of California is the ranking Democrat on that subcommittee. Over on the House side, House Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Pallone of New Jersey is the chair. Mr. Walden of Oregon is the ranking member, a Republican. On the Energy Subcommittee within House Energy and Commerce, it's Mr. Rush, a Democrat of Chicago, and Mr. Upton, a Republican of Michigan, who is the ranking member. On the House Energy and Water Development Appropriations Subcommittee, Congresswoman Capter, a Democrat of Ohio from Toledo, is the chair. The ranking member is Mr. Simpson, a Republican of Idaho. So again, if you are so inclined to push for appropriations of the type we've discussed, and these programs, those are your primary targets. There's certainly a number of members, and I think Tim Unruh has sent out to the NAESCO membership a listing of a number of folks who could help if they were supportive of these programs. I think, Tim, I'll plan on stopping there and should use this opportunity to take questions and respond to any questions you have, Tim, or any questions from the participants on the call. Is that what you wanted covered, Tim?
Yes, Jeff. Great job. Thanks for that. I really appreciate the breadth that what you're able to provide. I know, Jeff, that you also work very strongly with the National Association of State Energy Officials. Are you hearing anything about what's happening in the state energy offices as far as their staffing, their any actions that they're having to take or go forward with that you could share with us?
Great question, Tim. I would say that in a lot of cases, and it isn't uniform across the country, a lot of those offices are all working remotely. So I think that's certainly had a negative impact on productivity, but those offices are certainly committed to continuing their work. And one of the primary focuses of those offices now, under direction from their governors especially, is when we can get the economy moving again, we want to figure out ways to get the workers for a lot of the companies that are members of NAESCO back in those homes, back in those businesses, in the hospitals, in the schools, to keep moving in those areas. So I think that's a real concern, but they are figuring out ways to work remotely to try to move things forward and streamlining approval processes. I will say that obviously in some areas that hasn't been easy, but I know it's a primary focus of attention. They also have a weekly phone call to talk about emergency preparedness and response and the connections between the COVID-19 responses and getting those energy jobs up and running very quickly. Is that responsive to your question?
Absolutely. So we have a question here. It's one I suspect is on everyone's minds, including my own, and it calls for you to get out your magic 8-ball or your crystal ball. And what sense of timing do you think there might be before a stimulus package arrives?
That's a great question. And if Las Vegas were open, I might be willing to place some bets. But the U.S. Senate is coming back nominally on Monday, the 4th. The House of Representatives was originally coming back on Monday, the 4th, to begin working on this. But under advice from the Capitol physician, Congressman Hoyer, who is the majority leader in the House, a Democrat of Maryland, with assent from the Speaker, obviously, has decided to not bring the House back yet. So I would say that we are still hearing that the Speaker, the majority leader, the key members and staff for the relevant committees that I've discussed are certainly having discussions, collecting ideas. They are making proposals and are trying to move a package. The real question here is what type of trade can be put together? I think you know and have watched that with the dramatic decline in oil and gas prices, the president has indicated that he wanted to do something to save the oil industry. The question is, will it simply be actions that the Federal Reserve can take without congressional action, or will the action require congressional action? If congressional action is required, you could see a potential trade for things to support the oil industry in exchange for things in the clean energy industry. And certainly there are a number of countervailing forces. The renewable folks are pushing very hard for an extension of the production tax credit and the investment tax credit, as well as reviving the old 1603 grant in place of the tax credits for renewable projects, especially solar projects. I only bring that up because if you look down the line of potential stimulus proposals, you have those renewable energy proposals, you have those oil and gas proposals, you have some of the efficiency proposals we've discussed, and some of the low-income proposals, which might be treated differently. The Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, this new program for water and wastewater to avoid those shutoffs, a comparable program to LIHEAP. I'm not filibustering, Tim. What I'm merely saying is it's hard to know. There are a lot of countervailing forces, and there's this overarching request on the part of the governors and the state and local governments, the so-called Big Seven organizations that represent state and local governments, for an additional $500 billion in funding. Senator McConnell has indicated he wanted to go slow on this to see how the economy was going to bounce back. But I would say, if I were a betting man, and since I apparently have 115 witnesses, that there will be another stimulus bill, and there will be another stimulus bill by June. What's in it, I don't know at this point, though I do think state and local funding will be part of it. And I am hopeful that some of the energy pieces that we talked about here will also be in it. But would I take that bet and bet the mortgage? No.
Well, Jeff, if we were back in our office, I'd take $1 out of my pocket and I'd take a push pin and I'd stick it up on my board with a note that says, Jeff says stimulus by June.
Right.
So that's my willingness to bet on that. I put $1 into it. So I do have another question that's come up, and I'm not sure you're probably the right one to answer this. I might be a better answer at this one. But what is the proposed contracting authorities to access these funds if they get passed? And I know you mentioned that you astutely gave a United States code reference for people to look up. But I know I've looked at that particular code reference, and the one we're talking about for the funds that NAESCO is asking for specifically calls upon performance contracting as a methodology for disbursement of these funds. And
correct.
Jeff, has there been history of use of that particular code in the past of dispersing funds?
Yes. Under the American, that program, the performance contracting language was added to that statute. I know because I wrote it in 1990 under the State Energy Efficiency Programs Improvement Act, which is Public Law 110-440, I believe, and that was specifically included. There has been guidance guidance issued by DOE in the past that permits the states to use it. There is language in the Code of Federal Regulations, 10 CFR Section 410, I believe, that includes specific authorizations for states to use that vehicle. The issue of contracting authority is, of course, a slightly different question. At the state level, Tim, as you know, and a number of your members know, you still need to have authorization to have performance contracts at the state level, and there is no absolute uniformity, though I would say, the vast majority of states have specific authorization to enter into performance contracts at the state level and use these vehicles for it. So again, as everybody on the phone knows, and certainly as Tim knows, the type of authorities vary on a state-by-state basis. But as a general matter, those authorities do exist, and how quickly the funds could get out there relate to the bidding processes that are undertaken in the individual states. There is an additional potential complication that we need to be mindful of, that everybody on this phone call who lived through ARA is well aware of, and that is there were 4 additional pieces that were included, 4 pieces that added a degree of complexity to the ARA funds. The 2 of them exist in any program where federal funds are made available, and those are the National Environmental Policy Act, the NEPA process, if an environmental review is required. Under ARA, there was a blanket exemption for basic building projects that we were able to obtain, and we would need to get that blanket exemption again. The second area is for state historic preservation. Under Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act, as anyone who's worked in historic structures knows, we need to be mindful if we're working on a building that has historic significance or potentially historic significance, we would need blanket waivers on that. The two added complications under ARA that I really hope we don't have to live through again. One is Davis-Bacon for prevailing wage rates on construction projects, and another is the Buy American. While very well-meaning, it did have the potential to slow down projects. A number of folks that operate in states that have comparable statutes to Davis-Bacon are certainly well aware of prevailing wage laws in the individual states, which may apply to projects. In any case, the Buy American clause, again, while there are individual state examples of that, it tends to be that was a federal requirement that was imposed under ARA. And the amount of time it takes the Department of Labor to address Davis-Bacon was significant and could slow projects down. Buy American, the guidance was eventually issued, but it took time. So again, those are two potential complications. I don't know if I answered your question, Tim, on contracting, but I'm happy to take any follow-ups.
Yes, you did a fine job answering that question. One other question that we have come in, probably just time for this one last, is what do you think the emphasis on the old shovel-ready projects might be? I remember in ARA there was this term of shovel-ready projects, and my opinion was always that a shovel-ready project was somewhat of a myth, because we generally don't take a project to shovel-ready unless we've already determined its financing and funding sources, because of the cost involved of getting bids, doing design, and so forth. And I think during the ARA funds, we saw some performance contracts taken over by ARA funds because they were shovel-ready, and we lost those projects to just grant funding as opposed to performance contract funding. Any thoughts on that this time?
I would say I haven't heard the shovel-ready line as much as I did under ARA. But to be very clear, the ESCO industry has got to be making the pitch to Capitol Hill that they could get their workers and their workforce working, and they could get these projects moving very quickly. Again, we recognize, and this was associated with your prior question about the contracting process. I think everybody on the implementation side of projects recognizes the misnomer associated with shovel-ready. But it is very important in making the pitch to Capitol Hill that the programs can be up and running quickly, and we don't want to lose the momentum. Again, with the 2.3 million clean energy jobs in the United States, many of those contractors that are out of work now because they can't get into buildings and homes. But I haven't heard, and I actually did have this conversation with a number of folks on Capitol Hill already who are interested in not using the term shovel-ready, but are interested in knowing how quickly industry could mobilize. And obviously, it's a question of state, local, and industry mobilization, as well as workforce safety, which is an additional piece that may not have been as prevalent in 2009 when ARA was passed. But I haven't heard people aren't talking about the shovel-ready issue. All they're really focusing on is, can we get people to work quickly? And obviously, jobs in the pipeline are a much bigger help.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Jeff, I want to thank you for your time today and coming and talking to us, and really appreciate it. We've gotten a lot of questions about the list of contacts. You mentioned different people to contact. If if you'll reach out to myself, I can help attendees with that. Just so you know that each NAESCO member, affiliates, and ESCOs have received a list, some sample letters, and documents of NAESCO's positions. And if you want to reach into your company, you can go to the NAESCO website. You'll find your company, and the list person that we sent that to is on the website under your company's name for contact. If not, you can contact myself, and I can work with you to get that list and find that contact in your company at timothy.unruh@naesco.org. Thank you for attending our webinar today, and really appreciate everyone's time. And make sure to stay safe and keep the work flowing. Take care, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Safe.